But you can, if you can get the kid's social security number or date of birth or the parent, just by doing a little bit of your own little sneakiness background, you can always, I mean, no offense, everyone knows if they come to me and ask me a question to help them about something, I will do everything possible under the law so I don't get in trouble, to check to see if a person is who they really are. And we had cases here where we've had, when I was back then, that children were brought here and they weren't anywhere related to this man who had them. And we found out they were runaways from Texas, or he was, excuse me. And he was being severely abused, horribly abused. Am I boring anybody? Sorry. Am I making anybody sick? I'm sorry, Bob. I don't mean to pick on you, but I mean, you got a beautiful face and you're right there. But one thing you also got to look forward to is if you have a young teenager, mainly it's female, and they're with an adult male, okay, mainly it might even be their dad, uncle, whatever, and you try to talk to this child, and there's always a parent beside them constantly, there's an issue there, okay? And the thing is, you can ask questions, but you don't want to be too forward, because if you ask too many forward questions, like you're being too investigative at the time, trying to find out more, that parent will keep them away from you. And you'll end up being the bad guy. So if you suspect someone like that, a neighbor, a friend, or something, where you're like, hey, this guy hangs out with this girl way too much. I mean, she doesn't have any friends, but he's constantly with her. You can report that and give as much information to the police and children's services as you can, because once that's reported, we have to investigate it. And there's certain things that we can do that you guys can't. And a lot of the new thing now is what I was going to get back to the cell phone thing, is when these gentlemen are getting these kids to leave here, okay, a lot of the track phones, you cannot record all the, get all the text data from it, because the storage space on those isn't that long, isn't that strong on those. So what you need to do is sometimes, if you do suspect, I'm just saying if you suspect, and you notice that these kids have these Walmart track phones, okay, kind of like keep an eye on it, because a lot of times if all of a sudden that phone, like their phone numbers will change a lot too, because they'll get new phones, because they'll say they lost it. That's because people might be getting too close, and they want to make sure that that number gets changed so that they're not being tracked by basically the police. And like during my time, one of the things that amazed me out of all this is when I would get online, and I had certain criteria I had to follow that I wouldn't entrap these gentlemen when it came to trying to arrest them for sexual abuse, sex trafficking. What we called it something different back then, but trying to get these kids, because a lot of times what happens is that if I entrap them, meaning like when I would talk online, type with them, and I had a voice changing machine, if you can believe this, my voice actually changed to a 12-year-old girl. And I used to mess with Phyllis all the time at work. It was awesome. But I'd be talking to them, and I would, my voice would change where they actually thought they were talking to a girl. And when they would describe things they wanted to do to me sexually, I could never talk about sex, because if I did, my case would be blown. And a lot of times what happens is that these guys get so infatuated with the photos I would send, because the photos I would use would be actual police females when they were that age. And I always had to get the young females that were newly hired, because their photos weren't dated. And they would think, okay, I'm looking at this girl, this voice, and it's like this fantasy thing that these sickos, they get involved with and stuff like that. So once the time would come to meet, what would happen is if, like I said, I had a policeman, my first arrest was from a policeman from Florida, from Jacksonville, Florida, drove all the way, all night long to meet what he thought was going to be a 12-year-old girl for sex. And he brought me all types of stuff. But when he showed up and we arrested him, one of the first things I ask is I play it off when I'm interviewing him that he was actually talking to a real female. And my part that I made up was I was 13, I lived with my grandmother. My parents were drug addicts, like a lot of these kids are, and I had nobody. Okay? And what they do is the first thing they want to do is they want to be your first sexual experience. Okay? Because once that happens, they can give you to other people, if that makes any sense. But anyhow, when I was interviewing this guy, I was going through, and we used to have a set of questions. And one of the first things he asked me was, he says, and my name was Ann, can I tell Ann I'm sorry? So finally, I would tell him, well, you just did. And they're like, what are you talking about? I said, you were talking to me. And these guys are so adamant that they were talking to a real female, I just let it go. I just said, okay, if you think, and I try to explain. I would never tell them about the voice change machine, things like that, but I always tell them you're actually talking to a police officer, detective. But the one thing is another thing too with these children. If you notice that these kids on their phones now, a lot of these kids are taking nude photos of themselves. It would start out as they would be in their underwear. Well, I take that back. They'd be in like a bathing suit, okay? They'd send it to these guys. And then once these guys get their trust, they say, okay, how about I see your breast? And okay, but promise me you're going to delete it. And they promise they're going to delete it. They take the picture. And what these guys do, as soon as they get that picture of that young person, what they do is, like I said, they have networks. And the child pornography industry is $9 billion a year profit. They send those photos to their friends, and it's like cancer. It just spreads, and there's no way to ever get them back. So what they do after that, then they go on to other things where they're completely naked. And once they get that trust, that's when they want to meet them. And that's when the sexual abuse starts. And it happens here, you guys. It happens in Clark County. It happens in Enon. I know for a fact this happened here 2 or 3 times. And we have arrested the person every time. And the male that did it to these females, they were all out of state. And I'll be honest with you, my main objective was, one, is to help educate, but it's also, it's not to scare you, but it's to tell you that this is a serious problem in this country. And the only way it's going to stop, or at least we'll never stop it. There's no way we can ever stop it. But we can help kids who have been abused, who have been taken away from their families, who are being so sexually abused. It's sickening. It's absolutely sickening. And do you know that 1 out of every 4 females in this country have been sexually abused? So if you look around in this room, you count every 4th female. Males, back in my time, it was 1 out of every 7. And all the child pornography I've seen, the movies and everything, all these kids have a look of absolute terror in their face, either in the videos or in the photos.
What's the conviction rate like?
The conviction rate, I had a 100% conviction rate. I arrested, in my almost 7 years, I arrested 102 people, and they all went to prison. And that's something I'm very proud of. So, but you figure when a gentleman or a female or whoever molests a child, okay? And when I mean child, I'm talking anyone under the age of 18. To me, that's a child because they're not adults yet. The percentage when these gentlemen finally do get caught, like all the guys I caught, they had molested before, numerous times. And the thing is that they were molested as well. Because people always wonder, if someone molests, does that mean that they were molested? And the majority of the time, that's true. The thing is that a lot of people, do you guys all know the difference between Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3? No. Tier 3 is a person that has sexually abused a child under the age of 10. And when I mean sexually abused, I'm talking vaginally, anally, and that they can never be around children again. They can't be within so many feet of a school. They can't be in churches with children. And I can tell a quick story in this church when I was doing that. This is before Pastor Jeff came. There's a gentleman that came to our church that I had arrested the week before, and I knew he was a Tier 3. And he was sitting behind some of our kids who are now young adults in this church. And I immediately went from there and I sat beside him. And he naturally knew who I was. And I asked him to leave. And he said that he was welcome here because it was a church and that the pastor said he was allowed to come here. Well, the Pastor Chris, had no idea what tier he was. If he did, there's no way he would ever let him in this church. So he tried to come one more time after that, and he is no longer around here anymore. He actually is back in prison for life because he raped 2 boys.
In the recruitment process, if there's not any sex involved, is there anything illegal that you can arrest them for during that process?
No.
You have to wait till the kid's gone, and then you get involved.
If during that time, if, say, for instance, the child, a lot of times they use the sexing with the phone. If we can get the phone, that's the reason why they use those track phones, because they don't have the storage capacity, and they get rid of them. But if we can get the phone or get the search warrant for the suspect's phone, and we can see the photos, yes, we can. But if we don't have that, just by them talking, the only thing we can do is say, hey, you piece of garbage, you need to stay away from this child. Yes, sir.
Chief, it sounds like most of your cases were stings, is that right?
I'm sorry?
Most of the cases were called stings?
No. I actually had, my last case actually dealt with a gentleman who had relations with a 6-month-old. And it was on video. And that's the reason why I got out. I couldn't do it anymore.
The reason I ask here is there something that, you and I, we're not teachers, we're not routine in contact with kids, but is there something out there that, and can you give examples of people who just, citizens that we should go and look out for? Some thing that says, I wonder what's going on there, is that reportable?
If you, like I was saying earlier, if you see where, I'll give you an example. If you guys go to the mall at Christmas time, this is a perfect example. You go to the mall at Christmas time and you go up to the food court, okay? And we used to do this, and this is how we caught people too. You go up to the food court, and nowadays guys have cell phones. And I'm talking guys, you want to look for people middle-aged males, mainly white males. They're very nice looking males, and they are. What they'll do is they'll be in the food court and they'll have their phone, and you'll see them off by themselves, okay? And what they'll do, they'll hold their phone up, and it looks like they're texting. But actually what they're doing, they're taking pictures of children. And they're filming the kids, okay? So then they'll put it down. And if you watch them long enough, you'll know that their thumbs and fingers aren't typing. You might hear a click. They usually have it on silent, to be honest with you. And then another thing you want to look for too is if these guys, after they take the picture or photos or video, whatever they're doing, they go up and they try, what they'll do, they do this little thing where they accidentally bump the kid and say they have a pop in their tray or something like that, and the pop falls. Oh, here, let me go by you. I apologize. And they get it in that way as well. So the next thing you know this person, why is he sitting with this young lady? He just knocked the pop out of what, you know, she may be by herself. Because a lot of kids nowadays, they shop by themselves, especially the kids that are abused. They go to the mall to get away from their home life that might be really bad, and that's what they prey on. Another thing you want to look for too at the mall is, mainly with young ladies, is these guys, they get, the females will get on the escalators, okay? And say they got, a lot of these kids wear seductive clothing nowadays. The guys will get behind them and act like they're texting, but they're filming up the girls' skirts.
Hey, you didn't explain the tier 2 or tier 1.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You did the 3.
Tier 2 is a person that has limitations about being around children. Like if, say, their case is not strong enough to be a tier 3, they can still be around kids, but in a certain guarded capacity, if that makes any sense. A tier 1 would be someone that, and these cases were hard for me. Say you have an 18-year-old young man, and he is dating, say, a 15-year-old, okay? And they both care about each other. Now, granted, he's an adult and she's still a child, but they care about each other to date, and they end up sleeping together, and they have some form of sexual encounter, okay? The thing is that was always hard for us is because when these two kids like each other and they care about each other, I mean, things happen between kids. And the parents of the 15-year-old would want to press the issue that they want the young man arrested. And that has happened. And they end up being a sex offender for 25 years. And it's just because they had they had a girlfriend. It just happened to be a younger female, and things happen. But it's a tier 1, everyone thinks tier 1 would be the worst. Tier 1 is actually, they can be around kids all the time. It's not supervised. It could be anywhere like that instance where the ages, but the real bad ones are the ones, if you ever hear of a tier 3 around you, those are the ones that have had sex with little kids. And I mean little kids. They've molested children. And a lot of these guys, what they do is once say the girl or the boy starts developing, they don't want anything to do with them anymore. They like is that the pre, yeah. And like one of the cases I had a young lady who came to me when she was 18 and said her dad had been sexually abusing her from the time she was 13 to 18. And she didn't know what to do. And she had every sign of being abused. She told me that she wasn't allowed to have any friends. Anywhere she went to go, he had to be with her. So what he would do, he would have sexual contact with his daughter, sexual intercourse, every kind of, you can imagine, till she was 18. It was so bad, he used to take videos and photos of her. And when I asked her where the photos were during my investigation, and she said she didn't know what he did with them. And I believed her. And she gave me evidence of things he would do to her that she told me were in the house that I knew would have her DNA on them. But I had to get inside this house. So she did a tape phone call with her dad. And I still see this young lady, and she still gives me a hug all the time. And because she's, in my opinion, she was a true hero in this case. She did a tape phone call with her dad. Her dad admitted on tape that he had sexual intercourse with his daughter over 500 times from the time she was 13 to 18. He asked her at the time, because what he wanted to do is he wanted to trade her out, like basically he wanted to give her to other men in exchange for their kids. But he was afraid that she would tell on him, naturally. So when they were doing this tape phone call, she asked where the photos were, and he admitted to the photos. So, and all these other images and stuff. So anyhow, I did a search warrant on this guy's house. He was fishing at the time. We go to the house. I find some photos of her, okay? And he tries to claim that she took them in the shower. So, not trying to be gross, but I always ask him, okay, well, if she's in the shower, then whose penis is in the picture with her? You know, you piece of crap. Anyhow, when I went through the whole searching of the home, I forgot to search one thing, and that was his tackle box. And that's where all the videos and the photos were. I know that's where they were. But we went to trial, and it was a week-long trial, and actually one of our people from this church was on the jury in that trial. And I didn't know her at the time. But they almost had a hung jury because of one guy, and that's because he was from Kentucky, and he thought it was normal for fathers to have sex with their kids. So, but he actually, he got life in prison, and he's actually in a wheelchair now because he got beat so bad. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't want anything to happen. I'd rather have him spend his life in prison living in hell than be in a wheelchair, and, you know, I'd rather have him, be convicted, so. Yes, sir.
Any theories about why it's whites and not blacks and Orientals?
I'm sorry?
Any theories about why it's primarily whites and not blacks and Orientals?
I had a couple cases with blacks. Be honest with you, black children don't ever report the crime, ever. And the only reason why, on one of my real cases I had, this gentleman was living with his female partner, and they weren't married. She had a young girl, and she was 12 years old. She was a bigger young lady. She was sweet as can be. He would tell his girlfriend that he always had to get up in the middle of the night to go sleep on the couch because she snored. Well, he would go into his stepdaughter's room and rape her. And when we did the search warrant on his house, I took her sheets and everything from her bedroom because I knew there had to be DNA on those sheets. When I interviewed him, when you interview these guys, the way I would do it, and I would get called to every sex abuse case, even in uniform patrol. But what you want to do is when you ask them a question, these guys can never stop talking. They just talk and talk and talk without you even asking a question. Well, one of the things he said was, he said he was never, ever, ever in her room. And by the time I interviewed him, I already got my DNAs back from BCI, and it was his DNA on her sheets. So when I asked him, I said, so you've never been in this girl's room? He said, no. And I said, you and your girlfriend never had any type of sexual relations inside your daughter's room? He said, no. When I told him what I had, and I arrested him for rape, if you can believe this, the girl's mother actually accused me of planting his DNA on her sheets because that was her number one source of income, and he worked at the bread factory there in Springfield. And to this day, she sees me every once in a while, and she still tells me she hates my guts for what I did to her family.